Welcome back to Crimson Cast. Galen, Clavio, and Scott Caulfield joining you. It's Friday, March 13th. It is the Friday of championship week as we get ready for the NCAA basketball tournament. Elsewhere in college basketball,
others do.
It does not feel like it's coming home, as the English would say, as Indiana, of course, lost a couple of nights ago to Northwestern. If you missed our live watch party, we had a good time, sort of. We had a great time talking about the game. We didn't have a great time watching the game. But we're here to talk a little bit about that, but a lot more about kind of where things are at. This is not our end of season podcast because the season's not technically over. There's still an outside chance of postseason play, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But Scott, this is always a weird time. We did this last year where Indiana lost in the first game that they played in the Big Ten tournament, and it was like, well, what do we talk about? Should we wait until the Woodson era is officially over? And we did. And so we ended up doing a live show on that. We're not there yet, but we're going to talk, and we got some things to chat about. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. One of these years, we'll do a Friday Big Ten tournament podcast where we talk about the Big Ten tournament and our chances in it. I want to start off topic here. I've been thinking about you. As one often does. No, I've been watching. I know you were a Broncos fan growing up. I'm watching the Elway doc on Netflix, which is interesting because it's like, so two things. But one thought that I had for you, I just wanted to run by you. One, it's like they just completely dump on Dan Reeves pretty much in the whole thing, which is tough because he's no longer alive. But it's also like if Elway didn't like him, it's like that. Those are also the facts. But something they kind of brushed on in the doc that I hadn't fully thought about is, for those who don't know the history of Elway, he comes out of Stanford. He's going to be drafted by the Baltimore Colts. And he's like, yeah, I'm condensing this all because we're not a Broncos podcast. And he's like, hey, that organization sucks. So I don't want to go there. I'm going to go play for the Yankees, because he also got drafted by the Yankees because he's a stud athlete. And the city was pissed, like rightfully so, because like, hey, we have the number one pick. It'd be like this year if, Mendoza was just like, nah, I'm not going to play for the Raiders. Like, just sorry, your pick's gone. What I thought was interesting, though, is it would have set up this unbelievable rivalry. So he played like week 2 in Baltimore and just vitriol. Like, so anyway, sorry, he ends up going to the Broncos. Like, they figure it out. He plays in Baltimore and just tons of vitriol. Yeah. But I was thinking like that you lose this great rivalry because literally the next year they just leave. They don't have a team. It's not like people in Indy are like, hey, we're supposed to hate John Elway too. It's just like, hey, we have a team. And it's an interesting kind of moment where Elway would have had this place that everybody would have hated him every time he went there. And it's just kind of vaporized in a year. It would be like, it's not the best comp, but, because he ended up going back. But like when LeBron left Cleveland, and then just for the rest of time, if Cleveland would have just been like, hey, we're going to Seattle, then it's like just suddenly that hate is all gone. It's something they didn't really touch on. I just thought it was interesting that it's like very lucky for Elway that the Colts left Baltimore basically a year after he told them like to pound sand.
I have two thoughts on this. The key thing about the Elway to Baltimore deal was that it wasn't, first of all, the Colts were a friggin' mess.
Right.
The fact that they moved the next year because they were in this protracted fight with the city of Baltimore, and then the state of Maryland tried to eminent domain the team, and that's why the Colts packed the Mayflower truck up and left in the middle of the night. That's always something that gets conveniently left out by pretty much every Baltimore stand that's out there. Apologies to Matt Cohen and others in the audience. But that was a messy franchise.
Just real quick, like just to highlight that point, in the doc, they just do one shot of, Irsay, the father Irsay talking, and it's like, he looks drunk. Like he's just at some event, just like talking about, it's like, wow, like he's incoherently talking about the Colts. Anyway,
we've had all of these mini series or not, they're not mini series, but we've had all these dramatic series on HBO, like the Lakers in the early 80s. If you wanted to make like a black comedy, like a whole show on Robert Irsay, wow, that would, you want to dive in and read something about like what sports owners used to be like in the United States, that would be the guy I would profile.
And by the way, I think John C. Reilly could port over and do that as well. Like he did, he did Bus. I think he could do, anyway.
It would be within his range. But the key is, it wasn't even necessarily that it was the Colts. It was Frank Kush, who was the head coach of the Colts, who was the head coach at Arizona State, infamous coach. Read about this guy sometime on Wikipedia. You got to keep in mind, like, they were in the same conference, or, well, yeah, they would have been by that point, as Stanford. And Jack Elway, John's dad, absolutely hated Frank Kush. And that was where the animosity came from as much as anything else. That always also kind of gets left behind in the mix. But your point is well taken. It's why college sports are much better for long-term beef.
Yeah.
You think about, like, Illinois fans are still angry about the Eric Gordon thing. And it's been 18 years. And it's like, guys, give it up. Like, that was one season. But you get these long-standing feuds. You're getting one this year. I mean, not that Michigan and Michigan State needed to hate each other more, but Dusty May has managed to turn up the temperature on the stove on that rivalry, and that will last, especially if Michigan goes on and wins the national title. So I do appreciate college sports because of their permanence.
Yeah.
That you're able to manifest hate over generations in a much easier way.
Yeah, because University of Illinois is not just moving to Missouri.
Likely no. That doesn't seem like it's in the card. They might move to one of their regional campuses, perhaps, but perhaps not. Anyway,
it's a serviceable doc. I would recommend if you like sports, watch it. You learn nothing new outside of these little tidbits that you can kind of pull out. But anyway,
it's basically a glorified YouTube video.
These are all starting to become like they're produced and directed by Elway and his team, and it's like, guess who looks good in the doc? Like, there's really no dissenting voices. So
it's ample space for a remix if somebody wants to take bits and pieces of it and then give their own slant on things. Anyway, we are Crimson Cast, part of the Back Home Network, brought to you by Homefield Apparel, your place to go for the finest in college fashions, the softest fabrics, the coolest designs. Little 5 is just around the corner, Scott. We got about 6 weeks, and I'm sporting my now classic Homefield Little 5 shirt. They've got, I've heard rumors of some new Little 5 apparel coming out, but a lot of great Little 5 apparel for you folks in the audience from Indiana. This is something unique that looks awesome that you should definitely purchase, that is Indiana related, but is not Indiana athletics related. This and many other designs and styles and everything located on the Homefield website, so go check them out. Use the code HOME23, get 15% off your first order. Stop by Homefield at Tracks if you're in Bloomington, and you can find all kinds of IU-specific apparel, including Little 5 stuff, right there in the store. Again, Homefield Apparel, proud sponsor of the Back Home Network. We're also brought to you by Posh Hotel Bloomington, the finest in luxury accommodations right on Kirkwood Avenue, where Washington Street crosses it, a block from the square. Great views of downtown, great views of campus, and great amenities throughout the building. Be sure to book Posh Hotel Bloomington for your next football or basketball weekend here in Bloomington, and check them out on Instagram. Also, one new read for you today, folks, as we have a new sponsor. We'd like to invite you to check out Atlas of Memories Travel Co. They have a page on Facebook, and we'd like you to get in touch with Mesa Stillwell, a certified travel agent who has the training, resources, and trusted partnerships to make you get the best value for your needs. She'll handle all the details as you're booking for your next vacation. Works with vendors including Carnival, Royal Caribbean, Viking Cruise, Club Med, and many others. You can give her a call, 812-403-2213, or just shoot a message to Atlas of Memories Travel Co. on Facebook. We thank them for being a sponsor of Crimson Cast.
Or do all three.
All three.
Go to Posh wearing Homefield and then book some travel on Atlas. Do it all.
Love it. So let's dive in, Scott. Indiana, as we mentioned at the top of the show, did not play well at all up in Chicago as they lose to Northwestern in a game that it looked okay for Indiana for a little while, and then things fell apart very quickly. They end up losing by 13 points. Another game, as I've talked about with Grace quite a bit on the other show, where Indiana gives up multiple 10-point-plus runs. They give up a 12-2 run in the last 6 minutes of the first half. They give up another 12-2 run in the second half, and that one pretty much killed it off, as Indiana at one point was within 8, might have had a chance to come back, but essentially couldn't score the whole second half. So the Hoosiers limp to the finish. They lose 6 of their last 7 games, And they essentially, I think right now, unless something really surprising happens, the season is over. We won't know for sure until Sunday night. But Scott, for a team that on the 9th or 10th of February was not a lock, but a really good value to get into the NCAA tournament, maybe even be a single-digit seed, this was a collapse, the likes of which we haven't really seen out of Indiana. Normally the collapse happens in January, and then they put a little bit of a cushioning on the end of the season. We saw Woodson do this multiple times. We saw Archie do it multiple times, where they dig themselves a hole, almost dig out of the hole, but not quite. This one, they were above ground and then gradually dug a hole over the course of the last 3 weeks of the season. And unfortunately, this leaves a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths.
It does. Get ready. I got 3. I'm gonna steal Ryan. I got 3 rants coming up.
Ooh.
And this is going back to like back when I used to get super fired up and pissed and would start screaming. First one
last week.
Well, no. I feel like I've been a little more reserved, but let's break it out. Here's what I'm pissed about, Galen, or just annoyed about. I would say this is, we've had swoons, we've had end of the year things, but to me, the thing that really jumped out onto the page jumped out off the page watching the game was just watching how hard Northwestern was playing, going for offensive rebounds, the way they were playing defense. And I go back to the beginning of this whole season and DeVries's press conference about a year ago, where he's talking about, we're just going to get to work. We got it. And when we start playing hard and we start working hard, that's when the fans come back and that's when the banners come back. And we'll talk about banners later. It's like, stop, enough. But, that's the part that kind of really bothers me, is just watching this. And it's like, there's been a lot of talk of roster construction. There's been some debate. Do we have the roster? Do we not? Is there enough talent on this team? It's like, you're a better constructed roster and you have more talent than Northwestern. You just do. And then I'm watching them play harder, not once, but twice to end the season. Fine. You can lose to Illinois. You can lose to Purdue. Going to your point, though, you got blown out in those games. You didn't even look like you were playing hard. That's the part that really concerns me, is your season is on the line here. You're in the Big Ten tournament. You have a chance to, as you and I both did some VIP videos, like there were some interesting things you could have done this week. Poof, it's all gone. And I know that they're trying, they're playing hard, but it doesn't look like it. And you're giving up a lot of effort plays. And that's the part that really kind of makes me nervous, is that's what we were supposed to have. And that's something that any team can have. You don't have to have the right transfer portal or the right players, the right amount of talent, or the right money on NIL. Just play hard. Any team can play hard. And DeVries started the year saying that's what we were going to do. We're going to play hard. Well, you didn't. And I look at like, who's the leader on this team? I mean, I even go to like, your damn son's on the team. Like, he should be leading the team. Like, you have somebody who knows what you want, who should be playing hard. That's, I think, the part that frustrated me the most is it just looked like they were checked out. And they had already kind of said, resigned themselves to what was going to happen. And they were going through the motions and playing. But, to get down by like 15 points or so to Northwestern in a game you just have to have really bugs me. And you see it at the end of the season where they look lifeless against Ohio State. They were kind of in that Michigan State game. That one is fine. They beat the hell out of Minnesota. Like, woo, good job. Like, one streamer. But, same thing against Northwestern, against Purdue, against Illinois. Just a lot of lack of effort here at the end of the season. And I'm just bothered because that's what we were told was the one thing we were going to see change this year. And it doesn't look like it changed this season.
It was an interesting debate point towards the latter half of this season about are they playing hard or not? A lot of people argued, they're playing hard. They just don't have the talent to compete against these teams in the Big Ten. And I don't know that I agree with that fully. I think that certainly there was an upper tier of the Big Ten this season. And obviously Michigan was in that. Indiana lost their game pretty handily at Michigan. Illinois was in that mix. Purdue was in that mix. They did beat Purdue back on the 27th of January, which that result, the win at UCLA, does make me scratch my head a little bit when people are like, well, this team just didn't have the talent to compete. what the problem I think you run into is the 2 Northwestern games, the game against Ohio State,
Because
and
Northwestern's like Lamar Wilkerson's the most talented player on the court. Like it's
well,
diminishing.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I agree with that. I think he's certainly a very talented shooter. He's not a great defender. He's not that athletic or that long. There are certainly, I think, even in the Northwestern game, you could make an argument. But like Northwestern in the second game didn't even have Arrington Page playing. They're one post player, but Northwestern did out effort Indiana in both of those games, and I don't think you can argue to the contrary and not just sound like you're making excuses. Now,
Right.
that doesn't necessarily mean that there wasn't a significant talent deficit. And if you look at the way that Indiana closed this season out, one of the things we heard was, well, they ran out of gas. Rod Clark, I think, said that in the post-game radio interview on IU radio. And you could kind of understand why. I mean, Indiana functionally finished the season with about 6.5 players contributing. But again, part of the problem that you run into is this team looked functional for a long time, and they snapped themselves out of that 4-game losing streak. They get to 17-8. They're 8-6 in the Big Ten. And the idea has been, okay, you're going to stumble. You're going to have some bad moments throughout the course of the year. I don't think anybody was anticipating this being a perfect season by any means, but it looked like Indiana had sorted some things out in terms of what they did. And then suddenly they didn't have those things sorted out.
Right.
And it is hard to sell IU fans on the idea that, well, gosh, we just couldn't possibly compete when you think about not just, okay, you lose twice to Northwestern, and Northwestern on the season finished, 15-19.
With two of those wins, really 13 wins minus the Indiana games.
Statistically speaking, Indiana was by far the best team that Northwestern beat, and they beat them twice, including on a neutral floor and on Indiana's home floor. So it wasn't even like you went to Northwestern. The next best team that Northwestern beat this year was probably USC, who that's not great company. Like when it's like Maryland, USC, Penn State, and Oregon, and then Indiana twice. Like that's what you've done if you're Northwestern. That looks real bad if you're trying to sell everybody on the idea that you have a hardworking group. The roster construction was clearly not good enough on this team. That's a separate issue. And I think that part of the problem that you're going to run into now is that regardless of which one you decide you're more miffed by, if you're an Indiana fan, both of those things can be true. It was both a roster put together in a way that was not conducive to winning games once the Big Ten started, and it was also a team that really seemed to struggle to execute. And that Northwestern game, they started off defensively and looked like, hey, they figured out a way to stop Martinelli. They looked like they had a good flow going on offense. Tucker DeVries had 5 points in the first 5 minutes. Sam Alexis, I think, had 6 points in the first 8 minutes, and then they both disappeared.
Right.
And it just was like, well, can Lamar do something? Can Tate and Connerway go 1-on-4 multiple times and try to generate offense? When those things didn't happen, nothing happened for Indiana offensively. And then defensively, you let Northwestern, who is not a good offensive team, you let Northwestern have another game where they looked really good offensively. They scored 1.22 points per possession, and that is just not what you should be allowing Northwestern to do. So it leaves a bad taste in everybody's mouth. And whether you're upset about the roster and the way it was put together, whether you're upset about what you could perceive to be a lack of effort in key games down the stretch, whether it's both, even if there are excuses that could be made about either of those categories, you have now put yourself in a position where for the vast majority of IU fans, they go into the offseason with that experience over the last month of play being what's going to be in their minds over the course of the whole offseason. And I think for a first-year coach who many people did not know about coming into this season, that was the last thing that you wanted to do. You would have almost rather been bad all year with the idea that, well, gosh, this roster we put together because of supposed issues in the portal and when we could bring guys in just wasn't good enough, but we'll do better next time. To have the team actually play well enough to be in the tournament and then give it all up at the end of the season is almost worse.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like going into the offseason now, I feel like I was bringing this up earlier and a lot of people are now coming to me as like, I was concerned early on just how there was no continuity between this year and next year. It was an all senior team. And, early on, it's like, oh, no, that's good. It's like, you have a lot of experience. You have an old team. It's like, this is going to be good. You're porting it over. This is the worst case scenario now, because one of the issues was like, well, it's really hard to get, a good roster construction when you have to, build everything from the studs. It's like, well, you created a team this year where you have to do it again next year. Like, the exact problem that got you issues this year is with the exact problem you theoretically will have next year. You have zero continuity. And now maybe that's good, because maybe you just like, there's nothing I really want to continue from this season to next season. But if the problem was we had a really hard time building the team we wanted to build based on the situation of where we were at and how we had to go in the portal, I don't quite know how that's all solved this season, outside of like DeVries has 3 more weeks than he had last year. And it, for a fan base, it gives you kind of a tough, like, what do you grab onto for next year outside of just a whole nother group of guys that you have to learn all over again? There's going to be really nobody that you're like, oh, I remember him, from the year before, where now it's getting into this year. It's just,
Right.
it's a bummer. But I think it puts the team and like the interest in a really tough position.
So KenPom has this statistic called experience, and it is essentially a metric of the accrued games played and minutes played of the players you have on your roster. You said Indiana had an experienced team. They not only had an experienced team, according to the KenPom metric, they had the most experienced team, and it was a significant outlier in terms of the level of experience. So Indiana's experience rating was 3.18. The next closest team was, ironically, West Virginia at 2.86. And like the distance between what West Virginia's experience level was at 2.86 and the 3.18 that Indiana had, and is the same distance, because what is that? That's about 0.3. It's the same distance between the second place team and the 14th place team in experience. So this is where I think, and I just want to preface this by saying we can express disappointment and concern and provide analysis about these things without necessarily getting like hopping mad and calling for people's jobs. That's not the purpose of this. But I do think that when roster construction is everything, as it is right now in college basketball, you have to get the roster right. For a coach to go out, assemble a roster from scratch for the most part, like you said, and not completely, brought his son with him, who was one of the most sought-after players in the portal, brought his point guard from Drake, who was at DePaul, so had a couple of pieces to start with, plus had a freshman in Trent Sisley that was on the roster. But to have to go out and get the other contributors to decide we're going to go mega experience because we may not be able to get the top-level talent, the idea, and it's ironic because we saw it in football. It's like, oh, well, Indiana might not have 4 and 5 stars in high school recruiting, but they have really experienced guys, and that worked really well from a repetition perspective and from an experience perspective in football. It didn't work here at all. It was not a counterbalance for the athleticism or the height that one would need to effectively play defense or play offense in the Big Ten. So you rolled the dice on that, you failed. That doesn't mean that you don't go back and look at that and say, well, that clearly didn't work. So now what is your approach? I think that's the thing that I keep coming back to, is this idea of, to a certain point, Scott, I don't know how much relitigating what happened with the roster construction is going to really make much of a difference.
No,
Once you identify that it was a problem, and I think everybody's admitted it at this point, and the fact that Indiana felt compelled in the last 2 weeks of February to go hire a general manager and very publicly be like, this guy's going to come in and he's got all these connections, that was a pretty clear signal that Indiana understood, yeah, this did not work. The concern you have, though, is as you go into this offseason, you now, as you said, have to essentially start from scratch. I mean, it sounds perhaps like you might have Trent Sisley back, but he barely contributed. So you are essentially starting from ground zero again. And what I worry about is, and I think where a lot of IU fans have justification for feeling concern, is that all you have to go off of is this coach in his 2 seasons at the power conference level didn't put together a roster at West Virginia in his first year in the portal era that was good enough to get into the tournament. Yes, they probably got screwed, but they're going to end like West Virginia last year ended up pretty much exactly where Indiana is going to end up this year, 18-14, barely out of the NCAA tournament. Now, in that case, they had some pieces to build off of. In this case, you don't have those, and now you have to essentially start over again. So what is your philosophy going in? How does it change? And can you demonstrate to IU fans who have been through essentially 10 years of being a Rutgers or Minnesota level program in the Big Ten that you're going to be able to wave a wand and fix all of that? Because I don't think there's going to be much patience to do this season again next year.
No, zero patience. And I'll speak for myself, but I think I speak for a lot of fans. And I'll go through this, but I was kind of just telling some other friends, like, dude, I'm done. Like, I'm done with the portal. I'm done with updates. I'm going to poke fun at us a little bit here on our network. It's like I went back and looked. It's like we had emergency pods for Tate and Conaway. We signed Tate and Conaway. Like, oh, we got him, like an emergency pod, like Reed Bailey, like emergency pod. And I was on some of those, so I'm poking fun at myself. But you know, I think a lot of people are where I'm at. And this is kind of where IU football got for a while, where it's like, I'm just like, dude, wake me up when we play some Big Ten games. Like, I don't want, I go through and I look at, you know, so you have, you know, all the signings last offseason. Great. Lamar Wilkerson, we signed him from Kentucky. It's like, oh, that's interesting. Nope, didn't matter. You know, you go the year before, Omar Ballo and Miles Rice. We're going to get big name, big money. These are the best guys. Doesn't matter. Mackenzie Mbako, like, hey, we signed a 5-star recruit from Duke. We got him. Khalil Ware, who ended up having a good career, you know, a good year here, didn't work out. You can go all the way back to like Romeo Langford, that kind of thing. Like, I just feel like Lucy in the football. Like, I'm tired of getting excited and hyped for transfers and portals. I'm not saying they're going to be bad or good. I just don't care. Like, wake me up in December when they're playing for Indiana and I see how they're doing and maybe they win a Big Ten or game or two. And I think a lot of fans are there now where it's like, I can't get invested in this because first off, they're going to be here for 12 months. And secondly, it's like, it always seems to be a disappointment where in, you know, April, May, June, it's like, oh my God, this, you know, Reed Bailey has all of these. I don't want to pick on any single one person, but it's like, you look at this prospect, it's like, this is going to fit in. I see how this all is going to work. And then you get to this point, it's like, none of that worked. And it's not even a knock on the individual player. It's just year after year, you keep doing this. And I know for myself, I'm done. In 2 weeks, I'll probably be on an emergency pod where it's like, hey, this guy sounds pretty good. But I'm kind of joking, like, unless we somehow find that, you know, Victor Wembanyama has a little bit of eligibility left and we're going to sign him. It's like, I'm not interested. Wake me up in October. And I think a lot of the fan base is like that after 10 to 15 years of just this happening every single year. It feels like.
This is Scott telling me he will not be participating in podcasts all spring and summer.
No.
I guess I'll have to be doing a lot of extra work here. But look, I think your perspective on this is probably one that is shared by a lot of the fans. And this is something that you saw in Assembly Hall for most of the Big Ten season. Outside of the Purdue game and the Michigan State game, there weren't a lot of people in the stands. You know, you had some weekend games that had a decent amount, but it was disappointing watching the crowd interest and the fan interest continuing to dwindle. We've seen it in terms of just podcast numbers where football's way up and you would expect it to be, but unless it's a big game, interest in basketball has waned. And look, we talked about this 2 years ago at this time. We talked about it last year at this time. And
and this goes back to like something we've talked about in football, as you and I are well versed in. It's like at some point the team has to give the fans something to get fired up about. Like interest is down, and then you follow up by losing at home to Northwestern. Like that's a bad look. That's what Indiana football used to do. It's like they'd bitch about the crowds and then go out and lose.
It does tend to have an effect where it multiplies over time. And IU football pre-Signetti is a good example. You get people excited. and then they show up and they get disappointed. And look, I was at that game at home versus Northwestern, and walking out with that crowd, it wasn't an angry crowd. It was a disillusioned crowd. It was, you could feel
worse than angry.
You could feel a resignation amongst folks that this is just how things are. And as you look now at the last 10 years, I talked about this on Wednesday night as well. Indiana, in the last 10 seasons, you've had 9 NCAA tournaments. So you take the COVID year out, Indiana will have made 2 of those 9 tournaments, which is the same number as Rutgers, the same number as Minnesota, the same number as Nebraska, including Nebraska's win this year. It's less than Northwestern. It's less than Iowa. It's less than Ohio State. It's less than Maryland. And it's certainly less than Purdue, Michigan State, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Illinois. Zach Osterman made this point in his piece from yesterday. Like, this is a team that has as many losing records as almost all of those teams that I just mentioned at the lower reaches of the Big Ten, or what you think of. I think we all are aware of that. The problem is there doesn't appear right now to be a clear North Star for Indiana to go towards. And this is where you are, like, what do they always say? Comparison is the thief of joy. But you don't have a situation to be very joyous about right now at IU. And meanwhile, you look around the country, and what you see is a lot of coaches that have been hired over the course of the last 2 years that have been able to pull together at least a tournament appearance in their first season with a brand new roster. And so I've gotten a little bit irritated, is probably too strong of a word, but I think there's been a little too much defense played in terms of trying to argue that Indiana never had a shot this year. I don't know that I buy that. And I think it's important to note that Indiana did do better than some other schools in terms of hiring a coach and having them come in and try to put a roster together. If you look at, like, Xavier hired Richard Pitino, well, they only finished 15-18 this season. That wasn't a particularly good year. It has been a terrible year for Maryland under Buzz Williams. And what did they finish? 12-21. Sean Miller is barely hanging on to a tournament team at Texas right now. They're 18-14, same as Indiana. Utah hired Alex Jensen. They went 10-22. So Indiana did better than 3 of those teams and about the same as Texas. Texas will probably barely squeeze in just because of how bad the bubble is. But making the tournament matters. And when you look across at this year, I'll use a couple of examples here. So Darren DeVries got hired on the 18th of March and didn't have anybody coming back, brought in 2 transfers, Tucker DeVries and Connor Enright, 2 transfers that had played for him before, and then a bunch of guys from various spots across college basketball. You compare that with, say, Ryan Odom, who got hired 4 days later at Virginia on the 22nd of March and pulled together a roster that's currently 28-4, had 1 player returning at Virginia that played 8% of available minutes. The rest of them were transfers. You look at Jay Lucas at Miami, who got hired on March 6th at Miami, but had a team completely comprised of transfers and freshmen. They're 25-7. They're going to be a single-digit seed. And you look at what happened last year with Vanderbilt, with Kentucky, with Michigan, all those teams made the NCAA tournament. You look at Iowa this year, Ben McCollum, who I famously said I didn't think was the right fit for Indiana. He didn't have anybody but Cooper Koch coming back, and he played quite a bit, brought a lot of Drake's team with him, and that has resulted in a team that's going to go to the NCAA tournament this year. Indiana fans right now are not clamoring for being a national championship contender or even a Big Ten title contender. They want to be in the NCAA tournament. They want to have conversations in March that aren't, well, Indiana is on the wrong side of the bubble, or Indiana has to do X, Y, and Z to get into the tournament. That's almost made this whole thing worse this year, is that Indiana not only had a tournament bid in their grasp, regardless of how bad they'd played over the course of the last 3 weeks of the regular season, but you went into that Big Ten tournament game with a team that was admittedly flawed, but still had the opportunity to atone for its sin of losing at home to Northwestern. And every other bubble team that day lost. Like the pathway was golden right in front of them. And not only did they not capitalize on it, they looked like the season was completely over in their minds. Like all of these things together, the way that the roster came together, the comparison of several other programs and what they've done, and the way that they looked at the end of it, just, I mean, for a fan base that was starved for any sort of positive news and was ready to celebrate even a double-digit seed, man, that's just it's a tough look. And that's going to be something that I think has led to a lot of fans having the same idea that you have, which is, does it matter at this point what happens in the offseason? Show me when you've done something first, and then I'll come back and start caring again.
No, I think it's valid. It's what I believe. The other thing too that you know, as you're kind of hitting on all the teams that we are lumped with over the last 10 years, it also got me thinking about this. And I'll go lightly on this because it's still kind of coalescing in my mind. And also, this hasn't happened yet. But if we don't make the NCAA tournament, which seems pretty logical right now, you've been talking about this. It sounds like we're going to turn down either the NIT and or the Crown or any of the postseason tournaments. Here's what where I've been kind of going with that is, it's twofold. Let me get I disagree with that now. Like I don't care about the NIT or the Crown. I don't care which one it is. My thing is like a couple years ago, it's like, all right, well, yeah, because the fans would boo and like no one's gonna be happy with that. And it's like, all right, but there was a time when I was super happy for Indiana football to make the Pinstripe Bowl, which is kind of the equivalent of Crown in college football, because like the idea that IU football would turn down a bowl is absurd in pre-Signetti era. And you look at that, the phylum of teams that were around, it's like if Penn State next year wins 15 or 16 games and they got a Crown bid and they're like, nah, we're good. You'd be like, what? Like, who are you? You're Penn State basketball. We're not good enough to turn this stuff down anymore. And, I like the two things, like I know the logic of it, of like, well, we're not going to have a team. Everyone's gone. It's like, all right, well, that shows there's a problem. Like the fact that guys are checked out and don't even want to play for this university after the season and do the Crown, like that's a problem. Like the fact that nobody cares enough, like that's a problem. You can learn some stuff by playing more. God knows it looks like we need the practice. Like the coaches, the team, like everyone can do a little more. It's this problem that I've been feeling for years. That the program can, and I don't know how you solve this, but it still sells itself as, national championship. Like that's what we're trying to do. Or, even DeVries is talking about getting back to a Final Four. Like that's what we want to hear. But like the results are not even close to that. And I do wonder if, it's coming from a place of arrogance. Like, we're not a program that plays in the Crown. It's like we are. Like, and maybe we all need to readjust and reset and stop having. And again, my expectations for you were this year to make the tournament, which are not lofty. But I do wonder if this idea of, where a program is losing our blue bloodness and it's like we're scared of going into the depths of these other teams. Like we're there. And I look at it from I understand all the logical reasons why. I know they're going to turn it down. I know it's going to happen. But I think it's dumb. I think it's like we should be a team that we go play in a postseason tournament if we're given the opportunity. The fact that we've had multiple years, that multiple times that we keep turning this stuff down, I'm just at a point now where I don't like it. Like it feels like it's more arrogant than we are allowed to be right now.
I think the problem is this, that you're in an era of college basketball where if you've got something to build off of, sure. Like when Nebraska went to the Crown last year, I think they had a pretty good idea that they were going to have their team back.
Yeah.
They were going to have to add some pieces to it. They did need the practice. In an abstract, I don't disagree with you that this is not below or beneath Indiana. But in the actual case of where we're at right now, this roster is not coming back.
No, I know, and that's where it's like I understand the reality of today, but it goes back to like then this was all wrong and poorly constructed.
Well, it was a dice roll. The idea was, I think, we're going to put together a team that will lack in terms of the ability to play high-level defense, but we'll play good enough defense, and the offense will provide a boost that, kind of looks like, Fran McCaffrey's Iowa teams, where, okay, you're going to win some games because of variance in three-point shooting. You're going to lose some games because of it, but you're going to score enough that it overcomes your defensive deficiencies, and that's going to be a good platform to get things going. You get to the NCAA tournament, and even if it's a lower seed, you build off of that, you attract better players the next year.
I'm just thinking of like the selling point of like Fran's team minus the technicals.
I know. Yes, exactly. So I think, that was the idea. And it is hindsight to look back and question that. I think the larger question is, why did you have to do that if you were Indiana? That approach feels more like something that an Iowa would do or a Minnesota would do, because they don't have the financial resources or they don't have the pull. And that's where I think the bitter pill is for Indiana. And it's something that we saw last year, even when Indiana was trying to land assistant coaches. I mean, one of the big things we've heard from people who are like, well, you can't judge IU or DeVries too harshly for this season because they didn't get their assistant coaches hired until well after the portal had started. Darren DeVries was hired on the 18th of March. Darren DeVries would have been in talks with Indiana for probably at least a week, if not a couple of weeks before. Like, it was not a mystery that Darren DeVries internally was going to be at Indiana. To take until April 11th to hire your lead recruiting assistant when the portal opened at the beginning of April or the very end of March, I forget the exact date, that is a whole different structural issue that we'll talk about on a different podcast. But the idea that Indiana comes calling, you're just going to come and play, that was certainly demonstrated as not being accurate. But it's also the players that were selected. As much has been talked about in terms of, well, Indiana just had too many guys that weren't Power 4 level players that they tried to squeeze into the roster, and that doesn't work. Realistically speaking, if you go through and look at what Indiana had on their roster, they had 3 guys that came from Power Conference teams in DeVries, Enright, and Sam Alexis. Their best offensive player was a guy from Sam Houston State. And the guy who was supposed to be the starting point guard was from Troy, and statistically speaking, looked really good. If you go and look at the other teams, the ones that did make the NCAA tournament this year, Iowa is a great example. 4 guys from Drake, a guy from Kansas State, 5 guys from Drake, a guy that returned from Iowa, a guy from Kansas State, a guy from Robert Morris, and 2 freshmen. That's the roster that did that for Iowa this year. If you look at Virginia, their roster, they have a 23-year-old from Germany. They have another European transfer. They have a guy from Kansas State, a guy from BYU, and then a guy from North Dakota State, a guy from Toledo, a guy from San Francisco, and a guy from UC Irvine. That's their roster. We're not talking about a roster that was cherry-picked from the best Power Conference schools.
And they weren't in the Final Four last year.
Kentucky last year, you had a guy from Oklahoma, a guy from Oklahoma State, a transfer from BYU who came with Pope, a guy from Wake Forest. Not exactly a top-line Power Conference team. And then a guy from Drexel, a guy from San Diego State, 2 freshmen, a guy from Dayton, and a guy from Fairleigh Dickinson. So, again, it's less.
I mean, Purdue's scared of the Fairleigh Dickinson guy, I will just say.
That's a fair point. But what concerns me, and where I am open-minded going into this offseason, because I don't have a choice to be, and neither do you. Where I'm open-minded is that what the players, in the individual players that were selected, didn't mesh and couldn't play collectively at this level. It doesn't mean that they weren't good players individually, but something was amiss in the way that this roster was put together. And it's not the origins of the players, because if you look through the origins of the players on the teams that have been successful the last 2 seasons, they're from all over the place. I mean, Michigan's best player statistically was from the University of Alabama, Birmingham. Yaxel Lendenberg. Like that, it's more about picking the right guys and having them be able to contribute in the system that you're trying to put out there. And that is something that, unfortunately, and this actually goes right back to the point that you made, Scott, this might look like a dynamite class on paper, at least I hope it does, when we get out of portal season. No one's going to know. And I think you would be right to be skeptical about how this is going to work for Indiana, because this season left you with no proof of concept and no real clear idea of how this team's going to look. And even in the way that Indiana played they were a worse offensive and better defensive team in the first half of the season, and then functionally stopped playing Big Ten caliber defense around Christmas time and never really picked it up again. Like, it was almost two teams in the same season. I don't know what you're supposed to point to from this last year with any roster constructed in April and say, oh, I see how that's going to fit.
Yeah. In football, we kind of started this, I think, as a joke. The recite the drives was kind of a sad stat. Like, so we can start sad stats for basketball now. I threw this to you. Somebody pointed this out to me. It's kind of wild. Galen, do you know the last time in KenPom that we finished the season higher ranked than we started?
So to explain to the people what this means, every year at the beginning of the year, there's a projected KenPom ranking where it looks at your roster, it calculates production, it calculates estimated production, and it gives you a number of where it thinks your team's going to be over the course of the whole season. It's actually a lot more accurate than people think. So I didn't know this. I tried to guess. I was wrong. So I had to go back and look it up. And yes, the answer is 2012 was the last time that Indiana
started the season ranked 49th.
Yes.
We finished the season ranked 9th. Now, there's some caveats here. In 2013, we started the season ranked second and finished third. So it's like that's a real asterisk there. And then 2016 and 2020, we actually finished exactly the same. Yeah. And of course, don't forget 2020, we won the Big Ten championship. So like that, that's theoretical there too. But yeah, there's a lot of like this year, for example, this year we started the season ranked 40th. We're going to finish the season ranked 45th. There's some doozies in there. Like in 2024, we started the season ranked 49th and finished the season ranked 91st. But it was just kind of a shocking, again, back to the point that you're talking about. It's not just we're not making the tournament. Like every year we're kind of underperforming. And this is always the part that, we can get into this much more in the offseason. It's just, it's flummoxing to me. We'll keep going to the thesaurus because it's like this is
vocab day on Crimson.
Yeah, I can't spell it, but I can definitely say it. This is over. I keep joking. It's over multiple coaches, multiple ADs, and I joke multiple presidents, both university and United States. Like it's just There's no constant across between now and 2012. It's pre-Twitter to X. Everything's changing, and yet it's like we continue to keep this trend up. It really is odd that we cannot figure this thing out.
You look back and it's like 2023, people still look back on that year and say, oh, see, that was a successful season. Indiana made the NCAA tournament. They won a game. They started that season projected to be 12th in the country, and they underachieved to the point where they finished in KenPom 30th in the country. It casts a different light on that season when you consider how much they underachieved relative to expectations. There have been a 2021 under Archie Miller was like that. That was supposed to be a borderline top 25 team. They finished 50th. It's one of the reasons why he got fired. This season, Indiana was projected to be 40th. They're going to finish around 45th. It's not
an awful spread. Yeah.
Right. And last year, though, was the same. That team was 39th in preseason projections and finished 45th. So, for those people who felt, for whatever reason, that Mike Woodson was hard done by, that's a whole nother conversation. You did essentially have the exact same season, but almost the reverse, where last year's team was 66th in the country offensively and 35th defensively. This year's team was 40th offensively and 64th defensively. It was like we stepped through the mirror, but the only thing that changed was that everything reversed. And so when I look at this season, it's not an abject failure in terms of they started the season as a borderline tournament team and they finished on the wrong side of the borderline. That is less of the concern. The concern is that you have nothing meaningful in terms of minutes played or contributors that look like they're going to carry over to next year. And so where I get concerned is you think about, and let me go, and maybe we'll wrap up with this, like this whole argument about playing hard or playing as a unit. And if you want to look at teams like Northwestern, who was not a good team this year, but played harder than Indiana did in the 2 games that they beat them, or you want to look at a team like Iowa, who certainly had their physical limitations, but won some games because they were able to out effort and out execute at key moments, even lacking that athletic talent. That comes from culture. That comes from a team that is playing together and playing for each other and playing for their coach and putting themselves in a position where they can overcome certain limitations. When you start from scratch again, coming off a season where there was not a lot of demonstrated culture, like there were not a lot of games this year where Indiana finished strong and pulled out games that they might have otherwise lost. They had a brief moment there. Purdue, UCLA, Wisconsin, I think were games, and that was really what gave me some hope, was that, hey, look, they're pulling together and they're winning these games in a way that they didn't earlier in the season against Minnesota, against Kentucky. And then that went away. And it's like they reverted back to not having that. You don't have a culture anyway coming off this season. How do you build that next year? Who's building it? We heard a lot, when people would try to absolve Tom Crean of his team's bad play, which a lot of people online seem to have forgotten about. It was always like, well, the culture has to come from the players. The culture can't come from the coach. We heard the same thing with Archie Miller. We heard the same thing with Mike Woodson. So where's it come from here? So you're now going to have to go out and not just find players that can play at a Big Ten caliber level. You have to find guys who can play together, and you're going to have some kind of a culture build organically. That's going to be hard to do. Not to say it's impossible, but I think if you are feeling concerned about the direction of Indiana basketball, it's that they got to form a culture and have a good enough team to be able to compete. And I'm not saying they can't do it, but that's a real tall task coming off a season where you don't make the NCAA tournament and you don't really have major contributors coming back.
My concern is I think we're hitting a point where it's real. This could be where people just start to check out. And so let me finish with this. It's like you look at, I just went to the Pacers game last night. Pro sports are different where it's like the Pacers are having an abjectly awful season, but it's like I'm excited because they're going to get Halliburton back, but it's like they have a draft pick. And that's the hope that springs eternal in pro sports is you can get draft picks and you can get better that way. College sports doesn't have that. When you're bad, it ends up turning into anger and you want your coach fired. So I'm not saying we should do here because you're at a point now where like that's not happening right now, even if you somehow think like that's just not happening. So now you're kind of stuck in this. Do I get pissed or do I check out? And I look at it. We've never been in this position before where you have so much history of mediocrity. You look at Archie's first year going into his second, as you said, you could latch onto, you had Juwan Morgan coming back. It's like, all right, that's a player that we know and like. And you had, I just did a whole rant on not caring about recruits and stuff, but you had Romeo Langford, which is like an Indiana recruit, a highly recruited, highly recognized Indiana recruit. That's going to get some eyeballs. That helped you get a little bit of interest into the next season. Mike Davis's first year to set, his first full offseason, you had Trace Jackson Davis where he re-recruited him, brought him back.
Like Woodson.
Sorry, did I say Mike Davis? Sorry, Mike Woodson. A lot of Mikes. We've been through a lot of coaches. You had, TJD coming back. You had Race Thompson emerging as a senior. And then you also had, a highly recruited Jalen Hood-Schifino. You had something to reach onto. And oh, by the way, during both of those 2 tenures, you didn't have a good IU football team. You just had, so it's like you could renew this. As you mentioned, the crowds at Assembly Hall they're no longer pissed. They're just kind of, like, all right, I guess we're losing Northwest. Like that would have been I'm not saying it should happen, but it's like that losing Northwestern by that amount when you need that game would have been like a massive boo fest 15 years ago. It's not. The fact that you just have nothing to grab onto and you have to kind of find your own hope to this and no player to look to next year. And oh, by the way, every joke I'm seeing is like 175 days to football. When does spring football start? I think this is the biggest concern right now for IU basketball is like, you are here. You are now at the abyss. This is when fans can check out. When they're just like, I will see you in October. And I don't think IU basketball has ever really been in this position where fans are like, peace. I'll see you. Like, I'm still a fan, but I'm not into this until next year. And I'm going to go watch football. And there's really nothing I can hang my hat onto. And the only way I'm going to be positive is if I do it myself. And they're really playing with fire here. Like that's what I worry about is like, this is a fan base that is checking out. And there's no reason to check back in this offseason. And they will check in to football.
it's true in as much as there's the people calling for like a coaching change, which is a small number of people.
Yeah.
That's really not
No.
smart. It's not reasonable. But the people who are, instead of being angry, are just being like, ho hum, we've got football. That's it. I mean, look, I'm joyous about football. You all know that. But this is this is the DNA of Indiana is basketball.
Right.
And it is, I think about this a lot. When you go back and look at the history of Indiana basketball was rolling along there in the late 1950s. And then the sanctions hit because of football, and they had a rough, kind of a lost decade, which they still won a Big Ten title in 1967. But they had a lot of years where they had losing records. The Branch McCracken to Jerry Oliver transition didn't really work. It was not a good time. But that was, when you get right down to it, like Indiana wins the Big Ten title, I think, in 58. They win a Big Ten title in 67. By 1973, they're back in the Final Four, right, and won a Big Ten title. It wasn't that long of a period of time. So it is a good point where you are now going on, this long stretch of time where Indiana basketball has just been inconsequential on the national scene. And yes, you've had individual moments. You had the 2012 and 2013 seasons.
That was 18 months.
Yeah, but then it's shrunk back into the background. And there's a variety of reasons for it. And look, I think if you've learned nothing from the Curt Cignetti era, it's that having the right coach in the right position is the most important thing in college sports. Really the most important thing in almost every sporting level.
When you have it right, it happens quickly.
Right. And there are examples, Nebraska being a good example of it this year, where you can give it time to make it work. It's just you're dealing with a specifically unique situation at Indiana that none of the other blue bloods except UCLA have dealt with. And even UCLA has had more consistent pop-ups of national relevance.
Yeah, Final Four like 10 years ago.
They had a lost 80s, but then they won the national title in 1995. They had a lost late 90s, early 2000s, but then they went to back-to-back Final Fours.
Yeah.
Indiana fans have been asked to hang around since 2003 with nothing more than not even a handful, like a thimbleful of Sweet 16 appearances to tide them over. And I think the problem is,
don't forget all those Big Ten tournament title. Oh, sorry.
There just hasn't been a lot of success. And this year, you have a window with a new coach to capitalize and have positive momentum. And the concern is right now, a lot of IU fans are like, I saw nothing this season that made me excited about being an Indiana basketball fan again. And
as Mike would say, the chip stack has gotten low.
So we'll obviously be keeping an eye on this. I will apparently be doing all the portal podcasts myself. I'm glad Grace is co-hosting. At least somebody will talk IU basketball with me in the offseason.
I did not mean it like that. No, this is not my resignation.
But look, I think it is a legitimate issue where it's going to be a tough sled to get people fired up about IU basketball until something happens. And to close out, this is where Indiana football was, and we talked about it a bunch. You're now in the demonstrate it to me first mode if you are an IU fan before I get excited. And
it's demonstrated to something like it doesn't, like games against, Illinois Southwestern, or like just those don't matter anymore either. Like you win, you start 10-0 against a bunch of cupcakes. It's like, still got to show me something else.
We'll be back to talk about it all, including more coverage of football here on IU's on Crimson Cast and on the Back Home Network. There you go. Got the
happy. It happened.
Got it framed. That's awesome. But look, in all seriousness, we'll be back to talk more about IU. We'll see what officially happens. Again, not anticipating they're going to the Crown, not anticipating that they're going to be in the NCAA tournament. If there was a chance at that, it felt like that went away when Miami of Ohio lost their game. That took away an at-large spot. There'll be probably another couple bid thieves. So even though Indiana will be on those first four out or next four out lists, it's not looking good. But we'll talk more about it as we move through the next couple of weeks. So stick with us here on the Back Home Network. For Scott, I'm Galen. Again, thanks to Posh Hotel Bloomington for sponsoring the show. Thank you, of course, to Fernando Mendoza. Thank you to Homefield Apparel. And again, a reminder, you want to keep here on the Back Home Network as we talk more about IU athletics. We'll catch you folks on the flip side. Stay never daunted. So long, everybody.